We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Zayin Amud Aleph and Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 57a. On the previous summit, the Gemara asked if a person took wheat kernels and put them into the ground and then the omer is brought, are those wheat kernels permitted or not? And the Gemara continues the question, Ma'u leminkat umeichel minayu. What's the halacha in terms of eating from them? Is it kemad d'shadyan b'chadodam? Is it as if he put it into a jug, v'sharinu omer? And so then we would say that the omer did permit them because the omer was brought previously. It would be like taking wheat kernels that had already grown, you put them in a container. Certainly they already have been permitted by the omer. O dilmor, maybe batalinu agavara, maybe they become batal to the ground. It's essentially as if they've been replanted, and then we have to wait for the next omer for it to be permitted. And the Gemara says, take with the Gemara leaves that as a question. And Rashi explains, Ma'ula minkat minayu umeichel, can you take from them and eat? Kilomar, what it means to say is as follows. Agidulin didhu lomi boila. Now, if this would grow, these wheat kernels would grow, that's not even a question. Sharei afilu hiter omer shaleshtaket es hazram, even though the seeds themselves were mutter because of last year's omer, kodem shenizru, before they were planted, vizarim kodem ha'omer, and then they were planted before the omer, velo hishrishu, and they didn't take root, have hagidulin asurim. So then the gidulim, that which grows from those seeds, is certainly going to be asur, adshi yavo omer haba, until next year's omer. In other words, if you took those seeds and you planted them and they didn't take roots, so the halacha is if they didn't yet take root, that omer is not going to be effective. You have to wait for the next omer. But ki kami boile, but the question is, linakute min hazram shebekarka, forgetting about the fact of taking from what grows from those wheat kernels, which is certainly problematic. What about just taking the seeds themselves from the ground, umeichel la'achar omer, and eating those wheat kernels after the omer was brought? So is that going to be permitted? Is it as though you put it into a jug, visharinu omer, and the omer permitted them? Shaha omer matir satalushin chadashim shel shanazu, because the omer allows anything that was talish, anything that was detached, the new things from this year, v'yas gidulan hamechubarin sheshrishu, and also anything that grew that already took root. That's what the omer permits, and so therefore this would essentially be considered like talushin because you had uprooted it from the ground. O dilmar, maybe batalinu agavara, now that you put it into the ground, it's like it's being replanted, uchekarka bial madamu, and therefore it's just like the earth. And so then already the omer is not relevant to them. The omer can't permit it anymore now that you put it into the ground. That's the question of the Gemara. And again, the Gemara says teku. The Gemara leaves that as a question. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava, Amar Rav Chasa. Rava says that Rav Chasa says, Boy Rabbi Ami. Rabbi Ami asks the following question. Ona ein lahem bitul mekach yesh lahem. Do we say the items in the Mishnah that have no ona, they have no ona, but there is bitul mekach? O ein lahen, or do we say that there is no bitul mekach? And Rashi explains, Boy Rabbi Ami, O no, hatnan la b'masnisin, de'ein lehu l'chol hanach d'masnisin. We had a whole list of items in the Mishnah, like karka, etc., where there's no ona. So the question is, bitul mekach yoser mishasus. The question is, let's say you would have a situation of exploitation that's more than a sixth. That's what we call bitul mekach. That's when we say that the whole mekach, the whole transaction, can be reversed by either party. So the question is, yesh lehen o ein lem, is there a concept of bitul mekach by these items in the Mishnah or not? And Rashi explains the question. Mi amrinon me'al tono, do we say that it's only excluded from altono? Me'altono hudim, it's only excluded from technical ona, v'halab bechlal onahu, and you could say that bitul mekach is not really ona, elam mekach to, so it's called a mistaken transaction. It's a different category. O dilmar, maybe you would say, kevin de lav davar shebemidahu, since this is not a measurement issue, it's an issue of paying the wrong price, v'lo atiyah b'dibure, he didn't mislead him in that way, kashar din ono, so maybe it is considered to be in the regular categories, in the same category as ona, and then we would say bitul mekach also, just like there's no ona by these items, there's also no bitul mekach. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says, Hadar Amar Rav Chasa. Then Rav Chasa said, Pashat Rabbi Ami, that Rabbi Ami answered the question, Ona ein lahem bitul mekach yesh lahem. There's no ona by these items, but there is in fact bitul mekach. Bitul mekach is not in the same category as ona with regards to this. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Yona Amar Ahekdeshos, Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar Karkos. The following statements Rabbi Yona said has to do with Hekdesh, and Rabbi Yirmiyah said it has to do with land. V'tarvayu mishmeid Rabbi Yochanan Amru. Both of them say in the name of Rabbi Yochanan as follows: Ona ein lahem bitul mekach yesh lahem. That there is ona and there is bitul mekach, and that means to say that Rabbi Yona made that comment on Hekdesh, that by Hekdesh there's no ona but there is bitul mekach. Rabbi Yirmiyah made that comment on Karka, again, that by Karka there is no ona but there is bitul mekach. And Rashi explains, Rabbi Yonah of Rabbi Yirmiyah milsa be'apei nafshayu amri. Now this is an independent statement that Rabbi Yonah and Rabbi Yirmiyah are making. V'lav ad Rabbi Yami kaimi. They're not going on Rabbi Yami above. El Rabbi Yirmiyah akarko is just a statement that was made. Rabbi Yirmiyah said by land, Rabbi Yonah hekdeshus, and Rabbi Yonah made the statement when it comes to hekdesh. Amri mishmei Rabbi Yochanan. They said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Ona ein lahem bittul mekach yesh lahem. Again, they said that there is no Ona, but there is bittul mekach. And so the Gemara now continues and explains as follows: Mando amar hekdeshus. Now the one who says this by hekdesh, that says that by hekdesh there's no Ona, but there is bittul mekach, kol sheken akarkos. You certainly would make that comment with regards to karka. Mando amar karkos. But the one who said this with regard to karka, that there's no Ona, but there is bittul mekach, avola hekdeshos lo. That wouldn't be true by hekdesh. And the reason why hekdesh would be different is kiddush Shmuel. It's like what Shmuel said. The Amar Shmuel, because Shmuel said, hekdesh shavim moneh shechilo al shaveh pruta. Let's say you have hekdesh, and the item is worth a moneh, meaning to say the item is worth 100 dinar, and then you were mechalal it, you redeemed it on something that was only worth a pruta, mechulal, it actually is considered to be redeemed, and therefore essentially you see by hekdesh, in general, hekdesh is a complete exception when it comes to ona, because even legabe hekdesh, what are you really doing here by hekdesh? You're taking something that belongs to hekdesh that's worth much more, and you're redeeming it with something that's worth much less, and so therefore you see when it comes to hekdesh, it actually is excluded, meaning even though by karka we would say there's bittul mekach, it could be that hekdesh, there is no concept of bittul mekach because hekdesh is completely taken out from that category. And Rashi explains, Mando Amara Hekdeshos Amra Rabbi Yochanan. If you say that Rabbi Yochanan said on Hekdesh that there's bittul mekach, so Kol Shegein Da Karkos Nami Yomer, he certainly would say that by karka, by land, the Kevan Dashminan de bittul mekach Lav Bechlal Onohu, because once we're already saying that bittul mekach is not the same category as Ono, which is why it applies to Hekdesh, Mehecha Imit, why are you going to exclude it? Ida Hekdeshos Kachashav Le Mekach Tos, if it's considered a mekach tos when it comes to Hekdesh, as we're going to see, Afagav de Leka Tos Klapi Shemai, even though there is no such thing as a mistake when it comes to the heavens. And we still say there's a concept of bittul mekach. So certainly when it's between him and his friend, hekdesh is not involved. There already you could say the friend made a mistake. He wasn't thinking that. So certainly you would say that bittul mekach would apply and the sale would be reversed. But if you go the other direction, but if you make that statement by land, but you're not necessarily going to make that statement when it comes to hekdesh, meaning to say when it comes to hekdesh, it could be there's no concept of bittul mekach. Because again, by a person, when you're dealing not with hekdesh, so by a person you can say there was a mistake. You can say he never had such a das that there should be a kinyan, that it should be a kinyan and he should be exploited. But by hekdesh you don't say that. And since there's no concept of ona by hekdesh, there's also no concept of a mistake in terms of the sale kiddush Shmuel, just like Shmuel says. And again, mechulal, we say that it's considered redeemed. Keda'amran, like we said, the imot me ona, it's completely, hekdesh is completely excluded from ona. V'tos nami lekalameimar behu demanta, you also can't talk about a mistake by hekdesh, because who exactly is the one that made the mistake? And the Gemara continues, Tanan Hasam, we learned in a Mishnah over there in Meseches Tamuro, im haya kodesh balmum, yatzal chulin, if the kodesh animal was a balmum, if it was blemished, then it becomes chulin. V'tzarech lasos lo damim, and then you have to make up the difference to hekdesh, you have to compensate hekdesh for its loss. And Rashi explains, Tanan Hasam, we learned in a Mishnah over there by Meseches Tamura, in Meseches Tamura, im haya kodesh balmum, if the kodesh animal was a balmum, and Rashi says, Reisha de Masnis and Hachi, the beginning of this Mishnah goes as follows. Ha'omer harezu tachasazu. Let's say a person says, this animal is going to be a substitute for this animal. The first animal is some kind of hekdesh. Zu tamura zu, zu chalife zu. Same basic idea. This is in exchange for this. This is in substitution for this. Harezu tamura zu mechulelas al zu. Or he says, this tamura is mechulelas al zu. Lo amar klum. So all of those statements are nothing. She'ein karbon tamim mischalal. Because you can't redeem a carbon which is not a balmum. Now, if the carbon animal was a balmum, if it had a blemish, so then actually yatzal chulin, then that animal becomes chulin. It's no longer hekdesh. But tzarech lasos lo damim, and then you also have to compensate hekdesh. Im ein zu shel chulin yafik shel hekdesh. If the one that was chulin is not worth the same as the one of hekdesh, so essentially hekdesh is losing out. Mosef ala ma'osav ad kedei demei hekdesh. So then you have to add on to the value in terms of money. You have to add on until the value of the hekdesh. You have to compensate hekdesh. And so the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says on this Mishnah, what does the Mishnah mean? It means Yotzel Chulin Dvar Torah. It means the animal that was a carbon, the animal that was hektish, that becomes Chulin on a Doraisa level. But Tzarech Lasos Lo Damim Midivrei, and it's the Rabbanan that required that you have to compensate hektish. Reish Lakish says, Af Tzarech Lasos Lo Damim Min HaTorah. Even on a Doraisa level, you have to compensate hektish. And Rashi explains, Yotzel Chulin Dvar Torah va'afilu ein zu yafa kamosa, meaning to say, even if the second animal wasn't as nice as the first, Kedamar de'imit me'ona, because the idea is that there is no concept of ona, and that's why that first animal leaves hektish. And then there was a machlokas whether you have to compensate midoraisa. Rabbi Yochanan said no, Reish Lakish said yes. Reish Lakish says, Af tzarech la'asos lo damim Dvar Torah, you have to compensate on a doraisa level. Degabe hekdeshos erkacha ksiva bechulu, because of our erkacha shavi of mashma. He understands that erkacha means its value. You have to compensate at value. But Rabbi Yochanan holds erkacha kol damim sheyarchu mashma, means any amount of money. Mashmalei. That's how he understands it. Imzol im yoker, whether it's going to depreciate or whether it's going to appreciate in value. And so the Gemara now continues, but my asking, and so what exactly is the case? And the Gemara means to ask, how much did hektish lose out by getting the second animal in lieu of the first? Ilema b'chtei ona, if you're going to say that the loss was the amount of ona, it was essentially 1/6. So b'hal lema Reish Lakish tzarech lasos lo damin dvar Torah, Reish Lakish is going to say in that case that on a doraisa level you have to compensate hektish. But we learned in the Mishnah, elu devarim she'ein lahem ona. The following situations there's no ona, the following items, hakarkos v'avadim v'ashtaros v'akdeshos, applies to land, slaves, documents, and hektish. You see there's no ona by hektish, so it cannot possibly be, we're talking about a case of ona here that you have to compensate hektish, because hektish is excluded from ona, so that cannot be the case. So the Gemara instead says, Ela rather bittul mekach. What we're talking about over here is it was more than a 6. You're talking about a situation where hektish had a great loss, and so therefore Reish Lakish is saying on a doraisa level you have to compensate, and Rabbi Yochanan saying that it's only d'Rabbanan. But the Gemara says, B'ha lema Rabbi Yochanan tzarech lasos lo damim midivreim. In this case, Rabbi Yochanan would say that you have to compensate on a d'Rabbanan level. V'ha'amar Rabbi Yona ahekdeshos, v'Rabbi Yirmiyah amar karkos. But Rabbi Yona said that the statement was made with regards to hektish that there's a concept of bittul mekach, and Rabbi Yirmiyah said that the statement was made with regard to karka, that there's a concept of bittul mekach. And the Gemara continues, v'tarvayu mishmei Rabbi Yochanan amri, and they both say in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, ona ein lahem bittul mekach yeshlem, that there's no ona by these items, but there is bittul mekach. So you see, at least according to one view within Rabbi Yochanan, there's a bittul mekach on a doraisa level, and it shouldn't be d'Rabbanan, it should be they have to compensate on a doraisa level. And Rashi explains, Vama Rabbi Yona hekdeshos, and again Rabbi Yona said this comment of Rabbi Yochanan was made on hektish, and that's why it's a kasha specifically according to Rabbi Yona. Rabbi Yona kasha to Rabbi Yochanan, not Rabbi Yochanan. According to Rabbi Yona, we have a contradiction within Rabbi Yochanan, because on the one hand, we're saying within Rabbi Yochanan that there's a concept of bittul mekach by hektish. On the other hand, the compensation is only d'Rabbanan. And so the Gemara answers, Liolam b'bittul mekach. Really, what are we talking about over here? We are talking about a situation of bittul mekach, and so then the contradiction is Rabbi Yochanan should say there's compensation on a doraisa level, and the Gemara says that's exactly true. V'yepach to Rabbi Yochanan l'Reish Lakish, or Reish Lakish l'Rabbi Yochanan. Just reverse Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, meaning it's Rabbi Yochanan that's the one who says that the compensation is doraisa. And the Gemara says in any case, b'mai kam miflagi. So what are they arguing about? They seem to be arguing whether the compensation is doraisa or d'Rabbanan. What's the issue? And the Gemara says, bid Shmuel, they're arguing in Shmuel, that's the Shmuel we quoted above. The Yomar Shmuel, because Shmuel said, hektish of emone, shechilu al shava pruta mechulo. He said that if you have hektish worth a mana and you redeem it on something worth a pruta, so that's still considered to be redeemed. And according to Shmuel, we would see that there's no bittul mekach when it comes to hektish, and so that's exactly the machlokas. Maris leid the Shmuel, one holds of Shmuel, Umar less leid the Shmuel, and the other one does not hold of Shmuel. Ibai saying, if you want, I could say the kuli alma islu the Shmuel. It could be everybody agrees with Shmuel, and so then it would seem again that there's no concept of bittul mekach by hektish. However, but v'hacha b'hakam iflagi, however, they're arguing as follows. Mar savar shechiloin, one says that Shmuel just means if it was already done, then it's redeemed. But lechatchila lo, but lechatchila one shouldn't do that, meaning lechatchila, there is really a concept of bittul mekach when it comes to hektish. Umar savar afil lechatchila, the other one says, no, even lechatchila you can do this by hektish. There's no concept whatsoever of bittul mekach when it comes to hektish. And the Gemara says, Iba yisem aliolam b'chtei onan. If you want, I could say we can go back and say that really we're talking about where the amount of this second animal, the amount that you need to compensate hektish, actually is the amount of ona. Now the problem is if it's the amount of ona, so then there should be no ona by hektish. Why would we say there's a compensation on a doraisa level? V'lo sepech, of course, according to this answer, you don't need to reverse anything. But uvid Rav Chisda kamiflagi. But you could say they're arguing about Rav Chisda said the Yamar, because Rav Chisda said my ein lahem ona. What does it mean? There's no ona when we say there's no ona for hektish. It doesn't mean there's no ona at all. It means einon b'toras ona. They're not within the laws of ona, meaning even if it's less of an exploitation, it's going to be a problem by hektish. And Rashi explains, again, the Gemara said, V'yepuch, you should just reverse Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, because Rabbi Yochanan really says that there is a doraisa issue of compensating hektish by bittul mekach. Aliba de Rabbi Yonah, this is all according to Rabbi Yonah that you have to do this reversal. Aval aliba de Rabbi Yirmiyah lo sipach. Now, according to Rabbi Yirmiyah, of course, you don't have to reverse anything, because according to Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Yochanan never said that there's bittul mekach by hektish. To hal Rabbi Yirmiyah, aliba de Rabbi Yochanan, hekteshas ein lahem bittul mekach, because again, according to Rabbi Yirmiyah, within Rabbi Yochanan, hektish does not have bittul mekach. The man damar karkos, aval hakdeshas lo, because if you say it applies to karka, it does not apply to hektish kedeshmuel like Shmuel. V'achanami isa b'tmura, Rashi says this is what we find in Tmura, the same thing. L'Rabbi Yochanan epach, according to L'Rabbi Yonah rather epach, according to Rabbi Yonah you have to reverse it. V'kamiflagi Reish Lakish for Rabbi Yochanan, and Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan are arguing. Man damar ein lem bittul mekach islay de Shmuel. Again, the one that says that by hektish there's no bittul mekach holds like Shmuel. Tikevan de imet me'ona, once it's excluded from ona, loshna shasus, loshna yaser mishasus. It doesn't matter if it's 1/6 or more than 1/6. Because again, by a person can make a mistake. But when you're dealing with hektish, there's no concept of mistake. Umar Leslie the Shmuel, the other one does not hold of Shmuel. Because the idea is, if it's more than 1/6, lav derech mekachu, that's already not like a normal transaction. And since it's nothing in terms of a transaction, gabe chilonami, lav midi avat. So the chilul also is not going to be good. And then the Gemara said it could be everybody agrees with Shmuel, but the question is whether Shmuel's a b'di'evet or lechatchila. Shechilo in the ha'imit me'ona loshna gadol v'loshna katan. It doesn't matter whether the ona is a lot or a little. B'di'evet, it's going to be considered redeemed. But lechatchila lo. But lechatchila you shouldn't do this. Udvar Torah de erkacha shavi of mashma, meaning on a doraisa level, erkacha really means that it should be at value. Umar savar afilu lechatchila, and the other one says no, even lechatchila could be any value. Erkacha called to mashma. Erkacha means you could redeem for any amount. Hilkach lafkue isure v'afilu midrabon and shari. Therefore, to undo the isur even midrabon is permitted. But nevertheless, after time, you do have to compensate. And Rashi continues, Liolam b'chdei ona. Then the Gemara suggested we're talking actually where the amount that hektish lost out was exactly ona. The kamar dvar Torah, and we're saying doraisa v'afilu b'chdei ona, even if it's b'chdei ona, tzarich la'asos damim dvar Torah, you have to compensate on a doraisa level. The question then would be, why do you have to compensate? And we'll say that there's a different idea of what it means hektish doesn't have ona. It means einon b'toras ona. In any case, the Gemara then said, if you're going to say that we're talking here where hektish lost out kedei ona, so then v'lo sepech, then you don't have to reverse anything. The mafchis, on the contrary, if you did reverse it, kasha Rabbi Yochanan ad Rabbi Yochanan, then you actually would have a contradiction with Rabbi Yochanan. Because there you can't say, you can't answer the phrase ein lahem ona. The masnisin Rav Chisda the pachas michdei ona choser, that the Mishnah is like Rav Chisda that less than ona is choser. Midam Rabbi Yochanan ona ein lahem bittul mekach yeshlan. Because if Rabbi Yochanan said that there's no ona but there is bittul mekach, mechlal ona ein lahen, it sounds like he's saying that when we say ona ein lahen, the kamar ein machzir lahen onahu, means to say that we're not going to return the ona, meaning to say, according to Rabbi Yochanan, you can't change what it means ein lahem ona. We say by hektish that there's no ona by hektish. We're about to say it doesn't mean there's no ona by hektish, but it means say on the contrary, that even if it's a smaller amount of ona, even if it's a smaller amount of exploitation, you need to compensate hektish. Now you can't say that's what it means according to Rabbi Yochanan, because again, Rabbi Yochanan made these statements by hektish that there is no ona, but there is bittul mekach. If you're saying there is no ona, but there is bittul mekach, so bittul mekach we say that the transaction is reversed, but apparently by situations of ona, we don't go back on the transaction, and therefore you have to say that when it says there's no ona, it means that there is no ona whatsoever, and you don't go back on the transaction. But Rashi continues, Aval Reish Lakish ki mos v'sleim masnisa muki lakar of Chisda. But again, Reish Lakish, when we're asking this question, we can say within Reish Lakish that he follows Rav Chisda, meaning ein lahem ona doesn't mean there's no ona, it means einon b'toras ona. My ein lahen ona, what does it mean there's no ona? The gabe hekdeshos by hektish, when we say ein lahen ona, again it means einon b'toras ona. It means we're even more strict with ona when it comes to hektish, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Zayin Amud Beis.